Adam Smith, political economist and moral philosopher, was born in Kirkcaldy, Scotland, June 5, 1723. His father, a lawyer and customs official, died before the birth of his son, who was brought up through a delicate childhood by his mother. At 14, he was sent to the University of Glasgow, where he came under the influence of Francis Hutcheson, and in 1740 he went up to Oxford as Snell exhibitioner at Balliol College, remaining there till 1746. After leaving Oxford, he gave lectures upon English and economics, and in 1751 became professor of logic, and in 1752 of moral philosophy. At Glasgow, the reputation won by his lectures was increased by the publication in 1759 of his theory of moral sentiments, one result of which his appointment as traveling tutor to the third Duke of Buccleuch. In this capacity, he spent nearly 3 years in France and made the acquaintance of many of the intellectual leaders of that country. Returning to Britain in the end of 1766, he lived chiefly in Kirkcaldy and London, working upon his Wealth of Nations, which was finally published in 1776. It met with immediate success, and in a few years had taken an authoritative place with both philosophers and men of affairs. In the following year, Smith was appointed a commissioner of customs and took a house in Edinburgh, where he lived quietly and at ease till his death on July 17, 1790. Political economy had studied long before Adam Smith, but the Wealth of Nations may be said to constitute it for the first time as separate science. The work was based upon a vast historical knowledge, and its principles were worked out with remarkable sanity as well as ingenuity, and skillfully illuminated by apt illustrations. In spite of more than a century of speculation, criticism, and amazing of new facts and fresh experience, the work still stands out as the best all-around statement and defense of some of the fundamental principles of science of economics. The most notable feature of the teaching of Wealth of Nations, from the point of view of its divergence from previous economics thought as well as of its subsequent influence, is the statement of the doctrine of natural liberty. Smith believed that man's self-interest is God's providence, and held that if abstained from interfering with free competition, industrial problems would work themselves out and the practical maximum of efficiency would be reached. The same doctrine was applied to international relations, and Smith's working out of it here is the classical statement of the argument for free trade. In its original form, the book contained a considerable number of digressions and illustrations which the progress of knowledge and industrial civilization have shown to be inaccurate or useless. And of these, the present edition has been unburdened. This process will greatly introduction and plan of work. The annual labor of every nation is the fund which originally supplies it with all the necessaries and conveniences of life which it annually consumes, and which consists always either in the immediate produce of that labor or in what is purchased with that produce from other nations. According, therefore, as this produce, or what is purchased with it, bears a greater or smaller proportion to the number of those who are to consume it, the nation will be better or worse supplied with all the or conveniences, necessaries, and conveniences for which it has occasion. But this proportion must in every nation be regulated by two different circumstances. First, by the skill, dexterity, and judgment with which its labor is generally applied, and secondly, by the proportion between the number of those who are employed in useful labor and that of those who are not so employed. Whatever be the soil, climate, or extent of territory of any particular nation, the abundance or scantiness of its annual supply must in that particular situation depend upon those two circumstances. Among the savage nations of hunters and fishers, every individual who is able to work is more or less employed in useful labor. The endowers to provide, as well as he can, the necessaries and conveniences of life for himself or such of his family or tribe as are either too old or too young, or too infirm to go a hunting and fishing. Such nations, however, are so miserably poor, that is, from mere want, they are frequently reduced, or at least think themselves reduced, to the necessity sometimes of directly destroying and sometimes of abandoning their infants, their old people, and those inflicted with lingering diseases, to perish with hunger or to be devoured by wild beasts. Among civilized and thriving nations, on the contrary, though a great number of people do not labor at all, many of whom consume the produce of 10 times, frequently of 100 times, more labor than the greater parts of those who work. Yet the produce of the whole labor of the society is so great that all are often abundantly supplied, and a workman, even the lowest and poorest order, if he is frugal and industrious, may enjoy greater share of the necessaries and conveniences of life than it is possible for any savage to acquire.